In the winter of 1916, a polite, bespectacled London civil servant named Dennis Niven is about to be betrayed by a blocked drain. For days, the tenants below his top-floor flat have complained that the drains are blocked, and at last an engineer comes to find the cause. What he finds packed in the drain is not ordinary waste, but rotting human flesh and small human bones. Upstairs lives a desperately lonely man who has been killing young people for company and keeping their bodies in his rooms long after death. Over 5 years, he has murdered at least 12 young men, and almost none of them were ever reported missing. When detectives arrive at his door, Dennis Niven calmly admits what he has done within minutes. Asked whether they are talking about one body or two, he answers 15 or 16 since 1978. It makes him, at that moment, the most prolific serial killer in British history. He is a former soldier and a quiet office worker, the last man his neighbors would ever suspect. He meets his victims in pubs and at the unemployment office where he works. They are the lonely and the overlooked, drifters, runaways, and young men far from home. He offers them a warm meal, a drink, and a bed for the night. And then, while they sleep, he strangles them, usually with a necktie. What he does next is stranger and sadder than the killings themselves. He washes the bodies, dresses them, and keeps them in his flat as if they were companions. He sits them in a chair to watch television with him, simply so that he is not alone. At his first home, he hides the bodies beneath the floorboards of his room. Months later, he burns them on bonfires in the back garden, masking the smell with old tires. Twice, young men wake up in time, fight him off, and escape into the night. Both of them go to the police, and both times they are not believed. The disappearances of his victims raise so little alarm that even he cannot understand it. He later says he could not grasp why, after so many killings, no one ever came for him. When he moves to a top-floor flat with no garden and no floorboards to use, the problem becomes disposal. He begins to dismember the remains and to wash them away down the toilet. It is those remains, trapped in the drains, that finally give him away. Police recover what is left from the flat and the pipes, but they cannot even name most of the dead. Many of his victims were so alone in the world that almost no record of them exists at all. Dennis Niven is charged with 6 murders and 2 attempted murders. He pleads not guilty, and the court argues over whether he is insane or simply cold. The jury rejects the defense and finds him guilty. He is sentenced to life in prison, where he will die decades later, still largely a mystery. He leaves behind a chilling explanation. Most people like someone to come home to, and so did he. He simply preferred them dead. Dennis Niven is born in the northeast of Scotland in the autumn of 1945. His father is a Norwegian soldier, and his parents' marriage falls apart when Dennis is only 4. He is a quiet, inward child who never feels that he truly belongs anywhere. For a time, he goes to live with his grandparents in a cold fishing town by the sea. He adores his grandfather, a fisherman who is the one warm figure in his young life. When Dennis is 7 years old, his grandfather suddenly dies. Instead of being shielded from it, the boy is brought to look at the old man's body. He later says that for him, love and death became tangled together on that day. It is a connection that will haunt the rest of his life. As a teenager, he is withdrawn and secretive and struggles to form any close friendships. He is fascinated by uniforms and by the idea of belonging to something larger than himself. At 16, he joins the army and serves for 11 years as a cook. The strict order of military life gives him the structure he has always craved. But it cannot give him the closeness he longs for, and he eventually leaves the army alone. He briefly tries his hand at police work, then resigns after barely a year. He drifts into a civil service job at an unemployment office in London. He is intelligent, articulate, and completely, crushingly isolated. In the great anonymous city, Dennis Niven becomes one of the loneliest men alive. Niven settles into a small ground-floor flat in the North London suburb of Cricklewood. By day, he processes claims at the unemployment office for the city's jobless and homeless. By night, he drinks alone in the pubs of North London and the West End. He is surrounded by lonely, rootless young men, much like himself. He learns that a few free drinks and the offer of a warm room are often all it takes. He tells himself he only wants company, someone to talk to and fall asleep beside. But beneath the loneliness, something far darker is taking shape. At the end of December 1978, after another solitary Christmas, he reaches a breaking point. He brings a young Irish laborer home from a pub for the night. As the young man sleeps, Niven takes a necktie and strangles him. It is the first time he is killed, and it does not horrify him the way he expects. Instead, he feels that he finally has someone who will not leave him. He carefully washes the body and lays it out as if it is only sleeping. He keeps it with him, hidden beneath the floorboards of his room. Now and then he lifts it out again, just to have company in the flat. The dead, he discovers, never argue, never judge, and never walk away. For 8 months, the body remains in his home before he finally burns it. He builds a bonfire in the garden and tells curious neighbors he is only burning rubbish. No one questions the quiet civil servant with the tidy garden. No one notices that the young man who came home with him never came back out. And no family arrives asking after a missing son. In that silence, Dennis Niven realizes he can do it again. Through 1979 and 1980, the killings settle into a terrible, lonely routine. In December 1979, he meets a 19-year-old Canadian tourist named Kenneth Ockley. Kenneth is due to fly home to his family for Christmas the very next day. Instead, he accepts an invitation to the quiet civil servant's flat for a meal and drinks. He is strangled that night, the one victim whose absence the world actually notices. Because Kenneth is a tourist with a waiting family, his disappearance reaches the newspapers. But the trail never leads back to the lonely man in Cricklewood. Niven keeps Kenneth's body for days, taking it out to sit beside him at the television. He is not driven by anger, but by a desperate hunger not to be alone. The next victim is a boy of just 16 named Martin Duffield. Within days, another young man joins the dead beneath the floorboards. Over the following months, the toll climbs steadily and quietly. Many of the victims are so transient that Niven can barely describe them. One is a young worker from abroad, another a homeless wanderer, another a face he scarcely recalls. To the city, they are not missing persons. They are simply gone. Their names slip out of the world without a single official record. Niven moves among them like a ghost, picking out those no one will miss. He keeps a strange, almost tender ritual around each death. He bathes the bodies, dresses them, and speaks to them in the empty flat. For a man who feels invisible, the dead are an audience that can never leave. He will later say he simply could not understand why no one ever came looking. All those killings, he marvels, and still no one seemed to know. The silence that protects him is the same silence that has defined his whole life. It is the loneliness of his victims, even more than his own, that lets him continue. Not everyone who enters Dennis Niven's flat dies there. More than once, a young man wakes to find himself being strangled and fights for his life. A student visiting from Hong Kong breaks free and runs to the police. But when he decides not to press charges, the case is quietly dropped. A young Scot named Douglas Strachan has an even narrower escape. He wakes in a chair with his ankles bound and a tie tightening around his throat. He struggles free, escapes the flat, and reports the attack to the police. The officers decide it is only a quarrel between two lonely men and take no action. Again and again, the warnings are there, and again they are ignored. The men Niven attacks are simply not the kind the world rushes to protect. Each time he is let off, his sense that he is untouchable grows stronger. In 1981, he is told he must leave his ground floor flat and its garden behind. Before he goes, he burns the last of the bodies hidden on the property. He builds a final bonfire and lays old tires on it to hide the smell. Then he moves across North London to a cramped flat at the top of a house. The new flat has no garden and no space beneath the floors. For the first time, Niven has nowhere to hide the dead. And so he turns to a grimmer and more desperate method of disposal. He dismembers the remains and tries to wash them away through the plumbing. He boils away what he can and flushes the rest down the toilet. It is a solution born of panic, and it cannot last. The old pipes of the converted house were never meant to carry such a thing. Piece by piece, the remains begin to gather and clog deep in the drains. The very house he hides in is quietly turning into the evidence against him. It is only a matter of time before something rises back to the surface. By early 1983, Dennis Niven is living in the top-floor flat in Muswell Hill. His final victim is a troubled 20-year-old named Steve Sangster. Niven meets him, takes him home, and strangles him like the others. He keeps the body in the flat for days before dismembering it. Then there are the remains of an earlier victim, a drifter named Graham Allerton. It is Allerton's remains, flushed into the pipes, that finally betray the whole secret. In the first days of February, the other tenants notice the drains have stopped working. A foul smell rises through the building, and the toilets will no longer flush. After several days of complaints, a drainage engineer is called out to investigate. He opens the outside inspection chamber and recoils at what he finds inside. The drain is choked with a mass of rotting flesh and small bones. He reports it, but by the next morning, much of the material has mysteriously vanished. Enough remains lodged in the pipe, however, to send the police to the house. A laboratory confirms within hours that the remains are human. Detectives wait outside the flat for the quiet civil servant to come home from work. When he arrives, an officer tells him simply that they have come about his drains. Niven feigns surprise for only a moment before the truth comes pouring out. He leads them to the human remains he has stored in bags inside the flat. At the station, he calmly confesses to killing 15 or 16 people since 1978. He names the few victims he can and admits he never knew the names of the rest. Detectives are left with remains they cannot match to a single missing person report. Several of his victims have never been identified to this day. Prosecutors charged Dennis Niven with 6 counts of murder and 2 of attempted murder. At his trial, his lawyers argue that such a man could only be insane. The prosecution counters that he is not mad, but simply cold and remorseless. The jury agrees and finds him guilty by a majority verdict. He is sentenced to life in prison with no real hope of release. He dies behind bars decades later, in 2018, having never fully explained himself. He leaves only the haunting confession that he killed, again and again, for company. If you have followed this channel, you have seen how the most ordinary lives can hide the darkest secrets. You have watched a trusted neighborhood clown bury 33 young men beneath his own house. And you have watched a drifter confess to 600 murders he never committed, undone by a single paycheck. Next episode, episode 23, we cross to California, to a respectable-looking landlady who took in the elderly and the vulnerable, cashed their checks, and buried them one by one in her tidy garden.